Good morning. My name is Stephanie Davenport, and I'm joined by my co-leader, Lauren Hecht. We are the Southeastern Regional Leads for the HBA Women in Health Give Back, Amplify Your Impact initiative. Today, we're joined by Melissa Robertson, CEO of Dark Horses, a creative advertising and marketing agency in London, England. Melissa is going to talk about menopause and how it affects the workplace. So, you're going to talk about menopause and why it's important for businesses to sit up and take notice. What made you get involved?
Well, it sort of started actually almost exactly 2 years ago. I started a new job at Dark Horses. I'd taken a little bit of a sabbatical. I'd taken some time out from my previous job and done a bit of consultancy, but had a really nice time. And suddenly I was back in a full-time job, leading, a group of, ambitious and brilliant people. And I suddenly found myself, and I was learning new stuff. It was in a world of focus around sport. And whilst I am a big fan of sport, I perhaps didn't, know as much as the rest of them. And I found myself really struggling. I felt quite anxious. I had some real word problems, issues with just remembering words. And I would find myself like really panicking, trying to remember the word that is just a really standard word that you use every single day. And so I started keeping a glossary at the front of my book, because they were often the same sort of words that I lost. And I just felt really out of control, but I'd have this glossary that made me feel a bit reassured. I was sort of getting a few other symptoms, and I was talking to my friends one day. We were sort of setting up, because we were in the middle of COVID, these sort of regular chats and telling them about it. And, we realized we were all going through perimenopause, menopausal symptoms. And I was telling them some of my coping techniques, trying to sort of help the night sweats by going on the Peloton and like sweating it out before it could sweat out of me, doing these notes, and actually talking to colleagues about it, sort of explaining that I was struggling and that they mustn't feel bad by jumping in and helping prompt me, perhaps with names of people that I was forgetting. And they said, you should write about it. So I sort of wrote an article for Campaign, which is our industry magazine over here, about, how it was really rather terrifying going through menopause. I thought I was losing my mind, and yet trying to sort of run an agency. And I was absolutely stunned by the response I got. I just got so many people getting in touch with me saying how brilliant it was, to see it being written about so sort of openly and honestly, and how some people had left their jobs and, were really struggling and didn't feel they were getting any sort of sympathy or empathy. And then another publication got in touch with me and said, oh, we're writing an article about menopause policies. Would you like to sort of write an article, write a sort of contribution about whether you feel agencies should or shouldn't have menopause policies? And this was quite an interesting one, because we didn't have a menopause policy. I'd sort of written all the other policies for the agency. And, we're an agency of about 40 people. And I thought, well, I'm the only person who's even over 40. No one else is anywhere near menopause. If I'm writing a menopause policy, would I be writing it just for myself? And isn't that a little bit weird? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, hang on a second, it isn't just for me. It should be everybody that cares about this. So if I write a menopause policy, I want to write it so that it's not just for menopausal women, it's for everybody. And I did a whole load of research, got some advice from some really brilliant people. And as I did all this work, I realized how much work was entailed, and thought, well, hang on a second, perhaps lots of organizations don't have menopause policies because it takes quite a lot of effort to write one, to sort of contextualize what's happening, the biology of it all, what you can do to help, where some resources might be, what the symptoms are and why. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make it open source, and then anybody can take it, borrow it, steal it, adapt it, improve it. And hopefully then more organizations will take menopause seriously and put it in place. So yeah, that's a sort of trip down why I got involved in the first place.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I guess one of the things that I'm wondering, and I know you can only speak to the UK markets probably, but how big of a problem do you feel like this is?
Oh, I think it's a really big problem that isn't properly understood. I mean, I work in the marketing and advertising industry, and I read something recently that said that women of my age were as rare as unicorn tears.
Oh,
So here I am, a real life human unicorn tear. So apparently only 5% of our industry is over 50. And
wow.
Wow.
I don't know how many of those are women, but I suspect it's only a small proportion. So we're say, I don't know, 10% of that 5%. So there are very few women, but, there are 15.5 million people in the UK experiencing various stages of menopausal transition. And they will be experiencing it from anything between 2 to 12 years. And I just feel it's too many people and it goes on for too long for it to be ignored or marginalized. The UK has about 4 million employed women aged between 45 and 55. This makes menopausal women the largest proportion of the current workforce, madly. But research, and there are loads of different sort of research studies, but they've suggested that a quarter of them have considered giving up work as a result of menopausal symptoms. In fact, a Bloomberg study from 2019 suggested that nearly a million women had left their jobs as a result of menopausal symptoms. I'll throw you some other statistics out there. 63% of women said their working life had been negatively affected by symptoms. 29% had lost self-confidence at work. And the really upsetting thing is actually it goes further than just struggling. Suicide rates of women of menopausal age has increased by 6% in the last 20 years. So that now it's actually the largest cohort of suicide for women in that age group, which I think is really shocking. And there's been a tripling in employment tribunals citing menopause-related discrimination in the last couple of years. And I think, what it comes down to is we need these women in our industry, because without them, we've lost a huge swathe of experienced, talented, brilliant practitioners who are almost certainly at the peak of their careers. And I think, without them, you're going to see the gender pay gap soar. You're going to have boards and exec teams and management teams that just will have a real struggle with gender imbalance. So we have to do something about it.
Yeah, your article, it just really resonated with me when I read it. And I guess I'm one of those unicorns as well. But Melissa, can you tell us what are the symptoms?
So apparently there's something crazy like 50 different symptoms, not all of which happen simultaneously and not everything to everyone. But I sort of like to do a little, only because I had to go through this process myself, a little biology lesson. So if you'll humor me, during a woman's fertile years, we have estrogen and progesterone coursing through our system. This is the good stuff. These hormones are created by the uterus as it prepares for reproduction each month. But they're, and I'm going to struggle to say this phrase, but they're multifaceted omni-hormones. They're responsible for so much more stuff in our bodies. They feed our brains, our bones, our hearts. They create the good mood hormone serotonin. They regulate temperature. They produce collagen, which gives the skin its strength and elasticity, amongst other things. And then when we reach the end of our, that terrible phrase, childbearing years, women start going through menopause, or actually technically perimenopause. So peri just meaning the period before. Menopause itself, and this is a little known fact, is actually one day. It's the, let's call it the anniversary or the birthday of the last day of a year since your last ever period. Anyway, so the hormones and their receptors go kind of a bit haywire because our ovaries don't need to prepare for anything. So we don't create the same volume of hormones. Progesterone and more importantly, estrogen levels dramatically reduce. And this kind of causes chaos. And I sort of see it as grouping symptoms into 4 key territories. First of all, there's temperature. This is perhaps the most familiar one to people who perhaps don't know that much about menopause. So you might know them as hot flushes or hot flashes. But actually, we also get cold too. Blood flow is far more erratic. Our temperature regulation is hugely affected. And, you know, to give an example, you know, where you've done that sort of a robust session of cardio, and you get that sort of about 10 minutes later, that unwelcome, sweaty heat rush that sort of seems to come out of the blue after you've showered and sort of calmed down a bit. It's like that, but without the cardio. It just sort of comes completely unannounced and you feel utterly out of control. But you know, I also get things like, I'll suddenly realize my fingers are just completely and utterly numb. And, you know, you have to sort of start rubbing your hands or walking around. So that's the temperature. Then there's the cognitive stuff. And that is really hard. I mean, I always talk about, if I had the words to sort of start talking about it, I would, except I lose them all the time. You know, and I've mentioned that before, and it's genuinely really embarrassing. They're everyday words. I think for me, there's some weird things about particularly letters that start with S, words that start with S. I lose them, and they just disappear. I'm sort of, you know, trying to grab after them, but I can't find them. They're not big or clever words. They're just not there. And it can be quite terrifying. But many women also talk about brain fog, so they just feel, you know, like a bit enclosed in a cloud. Memory lapses. I've got a embarrassing memory lapse story with my husband. He's an artist. He'd sold a piece of art. The woman who'd bought it lived near my work. I dropped it off, got the money, and she rolled it up in a sort of like a bunch of money. And it was just so visceral, because it was like I was doing a drug deal. And I remember coming back to my husband that evening, and he said, "Oh, have you got the money?" And I handed him the money and said, "Oh, here it is. It's like some dodgy drug deal, la da da." Anyway, the next day he said to me, "Have you got the money?" And I said, "I gave it to you yesterday." And he said, "No, you didn't." And I said, "Yes, I did." I said, "We were standing right there. I handed you the money, made a joke about a drug deal, and you chuckled." And he said, "You really didn't. But okay, I'll have a look for it." In the middle of the night, I woke up and thought, "Oh, I put it in my bicycle bag. I definitely put it in my bicycle bag." And I went downstairs and I found it in my bicycle bag. So in my head, I'd created this whole story that definitely didn't happen. And so when I eventually admitted it to my family, I now sort of live under this curse of, if I say something happened and they question it, they just go, "Oh, was I chuckling when that happened?" So, you know, you have to find things to laugh about. But yes, I think, you know, where it gets a bit serious is that you can have huge lapses of confidence and self-esteem, mood swings, and insomnia, really struggling with sleeping that sort of exacerbates everything. 2 more sets of symptoms: physical. So, you know, you can experience quite a lot of pain. Lowered estrogen can reduce your muscle mass and connective tissue. It kind of weakens what you might describe as the scaffold of the skeleton, and can affect various parts of the body. You can have heart palpitations, breast tenderness, joint pain, migraines, bladder issues, hair loss. You know, my hair can come out in clumps sometimes, weight gain, which all sort of compounded. We've all been a bit achy when we've overdone things, but this feels like a constant presence, you know, like I sort of describe it like an evil, achy shadow following you around absolutely everywhere. Then sensation, and these are sort of the weirdest things and slightly more unnerving, from things tasting and smelling differently to itchy skin, burning tongues, a horrible word, formication, which is the feeling of insects crawling under your skin. I've got a trick for you. If you see a middle-aged woman sort of absent-mindedly scratching their lower back or upper arm, it's almost certainly a symptom of menopause. So, you know, imagine trying to deal with all of this while holding down a full-time job and pretending that everything is fine. It's not.
Well, you bring up a good point about, you know, having full-time employment while going through this. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what do you think organizations can do with women who are employed, who are going through, experiencing these symptoms and, in that age range you talked about?
Well, I think, the vast majority of organizations probably only play lip service, if that. Very few organizations have a specific policy or even mention it in any of their policies. So I would definitely say develop a strong menopause policy. There are plenty around there. We've written one that's open source. Channel 4, one of our big TV companies over here has written one that's freely available. So there's plenty of stuff there that can be used and adapted, because this kind of stuff isn't just, good EQ. It actually makes good business sense, because you're then, supporting your staff and continuing to get the best out of them. And I think it involves a big shift in mindset. So yes, I think probably just as a starter, organizations have to start with an acknowledgement of the challenges that menopausal women face, and then show how they can be supported. It's so important for women to feel that they don't need to hide their symptoms, and that any discussions will be met with empathy and support. I think there is still a bit of a culture where, menopause is almost seen as a bit of a joke. And I think it's only when you talk about it that people sort of go, oh, wow, I had no idea that you were feeling that. When you have written or adapted a menopause policy, make sure that you share it. It doesn't sort of sit on a dusty metaphorical shelf. Make sure the policy is for everyone, not just for women, because employees of all ages and genders need to understand more about it, because they'll inevitably either be a menopausal woman at some stage, but they'll almost certainly, everybody will come across one, whether it's colleagues, clients, suppliers, friends, family. But a policy on its own isn't enough. You need to ensure that line managers understand their role in delivering good working practices. They need to be prepared to make accommodations and aware of, some really basic, easy adjustments, and small tweaks can make a significant difference. A safe environment to bring up any challenges that staff are facing. For example, how long can they concentrate? What impacts are the physical symptoms having on them? It's quite good to agree some basics up front. So there's no guilt or feelings of under-delivery. Lots of menopausal women have sort of tried to imply that they have some challenges, and they've sort of landed on somewhat deaf ears. So people need to be prepared to offer up working from home, or at least flexible working, turning off the camera in meetings if they're having a hot flush, condensed or perhaps shorter hours, desk fans, so on and so forth. It might be worth investing in menopause training workshops. There are loads of great organizations out there that don't cost a fortune and can make it sort of quite engaging and interactive. I've read recently about men being given jackets to wear that sort of suddenly heat up whilst they're sort of trying to give a presentation, and you can see how flustered and stressed they get. So, because it's quite difficult to say, imagine what it's like. I think there's also a fun game you can play, like a sort of almost like a bingo thing, where you give people a list of 20 words they're not allowed to say in a meeting. And that's what it's like to sort of have these word holds. How can you think around them? Depending on the size of the organization, it might be appropriate to appoint what might be called a menopause champion. And there might be an opportunity, depending on the scale of the company, to create communities for people to share their experiences, coping mechanics. That's what I found in my small friendship group. We shared our coping mechanics, and actually, I know things like my little sort of glossary at the beginning of my book. Lots of them started doing that, and it just sort of takes away some of the stress. But they can be hugely powerful support networks, and they can be on WhatsApp or Slack or more structured quarterly meetings or informal coffee mornings. It just makes people feel, really valued and understood. And then, one thing I haven't talked about is, actual formal treatment, helping people understand the support they can get. In the UK, you can go on HRT or hormone replacement therapy, but that has a cost associated with it. And there's a big organization over here that has said that it will pay for any staff that are going on HRT, and they'll pay for the HRT, which is just a brilliant initiative to have. So there are loads of people sort of taking these sort of smart ideas on, and doing innovative stuff that make their staff feel super valued. It just requires a little bit of effort and a slight mind shift change, and no embarrassment. It shouldn't be embarrassing to talk about.
Right. Wow.
No, I agree. And I think just hearing you say those, the mind shift and a little bit of effort, and I'm hoping, I know Stephanie would agree, that getting your message out and speaking with you today is going to, help. You say a little bit of effort, the things you shared today, I think could go a really, really far way with individuals and also with organizations, the organization that we're involved with, and also Women Deliver, which is the conference that this content will be a part of. And I think that everything that you shared with us today will do nothing less than move the conversation forward.
And that's what it is. It's just start the conversation. I think it's just become a little bit of a uncomfortable thing to talk about. It's something that we should sort of keep hidden away. And actually, I think it empowers people to talk about it, without embarrassment. Managers should not feel embarrassed if a member of staff comes and says, I need your help. They should sort of have throw their door open and do what they can to support them.
Yeah, I think that's really important, not to be embarrassed about it. And I think, that helps, that, you feel free, where you can have that conversation with your manager to start the conversation. Well, Melissa, we just thank you so much for just being a champion for menopause. We thank you for joining us today for this very important video. And hopefully this message we know it will help others, and we hope we can spread this as well in the US. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.